Welcome to Supercharge Your EdTech Professional Learning. This is a topic that Emery and I are really excited about having conversations. This drives a lot of our conversations in real life and in our work and with clients that we've worked with. We're from PLC Associates. PLC Associates is an upstate New York and Naples, Florida, educational consulting company with a number of really cool signature programs. But one of the things in the past, 6 to 12 months or so that's been needed is a lot more focus on instructional technology and the professional learning to support instructional technology in this time. And that's kind of where Emery and I came into the mix, doing a lot of work with districts in that. I think probably between Emery and I, we're working with 20 districts concurrently right now, doing a ton of instructional technology work, making sure that technology tools align to the things that are happening in classrooms. And that's been a real challenge with COVID. So one of the things that we did was we put together this presentation based off of real engagement and conversations that we've been having with our districts, sharing some of those best practices and things that we've learned along the way. And I don't remember, Emery, if you or I are starting with the introductions, but we can do our introductions and get this thing underway.
Yep. So let's do that. Mike, on to you first.
So I'm Mike Newman. I've been Director of Technology for Newark CSD in upstate New York this is my third day. Before that, I was an instructional technology coordinator in multiple P16 organizations. I've been an educational technology specialist. But before that, my heart still continues to be in the classroom in many respects. I was a special education teacher in inclusion classrooms and also had a self-contained classroom. It's where I started my career. I've done online ELA and math teaching, and I've been a business teacher at the high school level. I had I worked 100% in online environments for a few years, which is what is a little bit unique to where we are now and where we're doing this session from. And I think it's really helped me to understand kind of what happens in the physical classroom versus what happens in the remote classroom and how those things can come together.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. And a lot of the conversation that Mike and I have had this year, we've been able to work off each other's experiences. And I think that's been a really important part to our work that we've been supporting through PLC Associates. And as Mike mentioned, at least 20 districts, probably even more throughout the year. And we've been working with our other associates to support their work in districts as well. So I think our conversations around instructional technology have really just strengthened what PLC associates can offer all of the districts that we're working with, as well as new districts that are signing on with us, as we continue to grow out. But also myself, I have a little bit of a different journey. And again, I think it's each of our different journeys and how we then bring our things together, which really improves our own capacity. So my journey actually started, I'm going to work backwards. I started out in high school as a biology teacher, and I started actually looking at things like flipped learning with like Microsoft Zoom and these different recording instruments within the classroom. And this is back in the mid 2000s when I was still in the classroom. From that, I moved into a role of curriculum instruction and technology coordinator in Wellsville Central School District, where at that time iPads were just starting to roll out. And as a result, we started to look at how might we use these instruments to support teaching and learning. And then from that, I went on to become a principal at a P-Tech school, which again was very focused on technology and how do we integrate technology to support teaching and learning. But also the students that I had were learning different types of technology that you did not even see in the classrooms on a normal basis. We were bringing those into the classrooms as additional opportunities for learning. So with Mike's and my conversations, and really everything started last year, right, Mike?
Yeah, it did. And one thing that we'd be remiss not to mention is that, before PLC, Emery and I worked together as well. And we'd often find ourselves sitting on opposite end of the table, arguing over how to implement a certain technology. And I think that grew our friendship, with me kind of having having to wear the IT hat at the time, and Emery having to wear that principal. I need to meet the needs of my teachers at the time. And It made us really close, and we continue to be that to this day. But, last March, this happened overnight, right? We went home on a Friday and we woke up on a Monday, and this was the environment. And teachers knew how to do what was on the left. They knew how to be over a student's shoulder, practice proximity control, work with a student one-on-one, and help support them in their learning. And then on Monday, they moved to a Zoom room. They moved to Google Meet. They moved to these different environments, and many times didn't have that understanding at the time that this was an entirely different environment and almost required a new playbook. And that created many challenges for districts. And in order for teachers to do what they needed, they did whatever they needed to survive. And in acknowledging that, and so did districts, and so did technologists, and everybody just did the best that they possibly could to support kids. So we always start off these presentations like this to understand that there is a heck of a lot of grace to go around here, and that now we're sitting back and looking at this a year later, and everybody did everything in their power to support kids. And many of us felt short each and every day in doing so because we didn't know what we didn't know. And a big part of this presentation is looking back and saying, hey, we had this happen. What are the thoughtful steps that we can do to move forward with instructional technology and professional learning to make sure that if something like this ever happened again, our teachers would be prepared, our students would be prepared, and we would just be ready.
Absolutely. So thanks, Mike. And I remember last year, Mike and I were talking to each other that weekend, and I had been in a district that prior Friday, knowing ahead that I needed to start thinking about how do I support districts differently. It wasn't just around best practices. I knew that I could leverage my experience as a technology coordinator, but then also someone who has experience in using technology with students and teachers and how best I could support that. Mike, your conversation was a little different from mine because your head started swirling around, how am I going to support maybe deploying more pieces of technology to students? How do I manage the software around what we might need? And that software piece is really a neat conversation in itself, because also what happened last spring was all of our tech companies started to kind of like openly allow teachers and schools and districts to use their programs for free for at least till the end of the school year. But what that ends up causing, and in another series that we talk about, what that does is it starts to create some IT nightmares. But with all this free software, what ends up happening is just like this image of head on desk, the technology leadership was not ready to support all of this free software, because there are lists out there. And Mike, you shared with me within a week of that, you showed me a list of like an Excel sheet, about 5,000 different titles that were all free. And it was great that everybody was offering that. But at the same time, we were starting to just use software to hopefully support the things that we were needing in our classrooms and our schools. But Mike, continue on.
Yeah, I mean, every vendor wanted to be helpful, just like teachers wanted to be helpful, right? They saw a crisis and they jumped in and they said, here's how we can help. We can offer you our things for free through the end of the year. Mind you, that was not really thinking of school compliance. It was not really thinking, it was just, we're going to do everything we can just to help right now. And now that we're beyond that a little bit, we find ourselves in the roles that we play, unwinding a lot of what has happened. Now, instead of thinking districts are using 10 or 12 pieces of software, they don't realize 82 are floating around the buildings. And that's been a real challenge for IT department. It's been a challenge for administration, but it's also really been a big challenge for students, for families, and it's made it almost impossible to be effective with professional learning.
So the other part of the conversation that I've been having a lot more with districts, and Mike, you've been doing the same thing, is we're starting to now see 1 year later the opportunity to what we're thinking about. How do we begin shifting out of the pandemic? We know that guidelines are starting to lax on that social distancing. There's still that happening, but we're seeing more and more students coming back into school. So we're starting to see that shift of going from the Zoom and Google Meets to more in-school things. But what we are also learning and really recommending to districts and schools and the administrators and the teachers we're working with is we don't want to go backwards. We want to, though, continue all the learning that's happened this past year around the integration of technology and the professional learning that's happened around that, to really use the tools in the ways that we see them as most advantageous for their purpose. Because Mike and I talk a lot about technology through its purpose, and you're going to see how we use our assessments that we've created in our conversations to develop purposeful learning, as well as then we talk about purposeful use of our technology. We want to make sure, and part of our presentation tonight is going to demonstrate that we want to continue moving that forward. We do not want that to not be happening. Like, we don't want to go back to what we call that old normal. Really what we're doing is looking at this opportunity that we've had throughout this year, the opportunity to continue to create our new normal.
And the way that we don't do that is by focusing on what I call drop and dump professional development or professional learning, which is having your software vendor come in or having somebody come in and teach the overview. I sat in one of those meetings today. I learned an overview of a piece of software, and by the time I left the room, I'd forgotten 90% of it, and I'll probably be calling the vendor again in 2 days. It's really an antiquated model for professional learning. It's a model of professional learning that happens out of necessity when there are too many tools being used within a district. If you have to offer professional learning as an instructional coach or a technology integrator, and you have 30 things to offer professional learning on, there are only so many days in a year to offer that. So you wind up dropping and dumping, and you hope that some things stick. And I'm sure everybody in here is familiar with that type of professional development. It's been a standard for many years, but my hope is this becomes more of an antiquated model as time goes on.
Yeah.
And as time goes on, it gets replaced by a new model. And this is one of our favorite slides, and it sort of showed up on social media this past.
Yeah, I really like this slide, because what we really want to start thinking, and this is the model that Mike and I use, and really at PLC Associates, this is part of the way that we understand how things are working. So with professional learning, there's a lot of moving pieces, but it's very important to understand our entry points and then how we navigate those so that we're always building the right supports throughout that navigation. And we use things like assessments to find our baselines. We use our assessments throughout the progress monitor, and we use our assessments to find out what was our return on our investment. And when we talk about assessments, we have things like our EdTech integration assessment, which essentially is looking at best practices in the classroom and how it fuses with instructional technology. But when you look at this image of the frog jumping across, they can't just do a straight line and hope that we hit the end. As we go through, you can notice how many different touch points the frog has. And if you've played this game before, you don't always have to enter at the same spot. You can actually hop across before you enter into the highway, and then hop across again before you have to go across that river. So really what this is demonstrating is our opportunities that when we have multiple touch points across professional learning, and we're closing the loop on that each time, we can build the capacity. So Mike, as you said, what we're really starting to do is being able to support very specific moves around instructional technology as far as our conversation is concerned, to ensure that we're getting to the goal at the end.
Yeah, and that could look many different ways, right? It can be the way that we do it is we will do, cohort sessions of professional learning. We'll do bigger groups of professional learning. We'll do one-to-one coaching sessions. We'll do a variety of different things, and eventually be able to meet those individual needs and navigate any of those challenges that are happening. Quite often, we'll work with 3 or 4 different teams in a day. Each of those different teams will be at a little bit different of a place. We'll move them a little bit forward and set some new goals for the next time that we meet. That's really the way that it's impacted. You have a session, you give people time to practice, you come back and you check for accountability. You talk about next steps, you give people time to practice, and then rinse and repeat, and that cycle continues. But what that requires is this. It requires districts to really have a deep conversation around what's on their ed tech tool belt for what's on available ed tech. We've all seen contractors at some point, right? And contractors have this big messy van or truck with a bunch of crap on it and a bunch of tools that we only take out once in a while. And then we have that tool belt with our hammers and our wrenches and some of those really core tools that we know that we're going to need almost every single day. Now, each district needs to decide that. And we spend time working with districts and schools on making those decisions for themselves based on criteria. If they're looking for something to look at present levels of performance, if they're looking to increase formative assessment, we use assessments to figure out what they know or don't know in terms of instructional technology and refreshing just learning and how to teach. So we look at those things and then we start to frame this EdTech tool belt, and the tool belt is where we expend most of our energy. Because at the end of the day, we need a really great hammer. It's okay if the tile saw is just okay if we only use the tile saw once or twice a year, right? And that gives us our core set of tools that all students, all staff, administrators, everybody is going to use, and then things that we could pull out of our pocket if and only if we don't have something supported by the district that fits what we need in those moments. Now, from the student's perspective, where I really lose sleep at night is this idea that if this doesn't happen, this is what EdTech looks like from the student's perspective. We have a 7-period day, and we took this from an actual high school. A high school filled out an assessment for us where we asked them just basically what tools they used. And then we took a sample of the teachers in that high school and created a 7-period day. And in science, that teacher used 7 pieces of software. In math, that teacher used 3, and so on and so forth. So at the end of it, we looked at what a student's day would look like, and their instances of software throughout the day was 24 plus whatever is in Google Suite. For this district, you might have an Office, a Microsoft district or something else. But when we looked at that, we're saying, man, this student could potentially have to open 30 pieces of software a day and have 30 different instances of software every day. And somebody just put into the chat box, and their parents are losing their minds as well. And can you imagine why kids are disengaging? And all of this time, think about the conversations we've been having. It's been, they're disengaged in their learning, they're not showing up. We're looking at the learning pieces of this, absent of the technology pieces of this. And if you can't build expertise in pieces of technology, if we look at it as teachers, if Emery and I went into a district and said, man, we have 8 days with you, and at the end of these days, you're going to know 36 pieces of software like the back of your hand, we would be gone really fast. And that's what's happening with teachers and students in some respect. Every teacher is on some level siloed. The science teacher and the math teacher might be right next to classrooms, but never have a conversation about the software they use to make sure that they're in line with each other. And that's something that probably has to happen at a higher level in that technology, in that instructional space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Mike, I'll just add on one more piece. What's been really important this year for me is when I actually have groups of teachers that they're from actually different content areas. I thrive on that because then we start talking about, for example, Pear Deck. And then we have conversation how each one is using Pear Deck. They start learning from each other, but then what we really start doing is they start to actually calibrate the process of how they use Pear Deck, so that from room to room, the students have heard some of that common language on what the teachers are talking about the tool. So at least then we know that teachers are using in similar ways those tools. So the more we can actually get our teachers from different content areas or different grade levels or from different classrooms, as Mike, you said, we can get science and math together and have them have conversations around the use of their tools. The more consistency that tool is going to happen. Plus it may, yeah, our kids are really using a lot of that. And the other thing, it's really funny I was with a district this past week, and a teacher pointed out, yeah, one of the biggest things is these kids have like 20 tabs open. And I go, well, how many tools are they probably? Those are probably all going to tools. right, Mike? So the kids have so many tabs open up that no wonder their Chromebooks or their computers are slow. There's so much working on these computers that it really takes away and it sucks the energy out of their computers. All right. So early on, I talked about, our entry points, and we use assessments to really gauge where districts, schools, administrators and teachers are at in figuring out what could be our best entry points in working with all of them. So these are some samples. These are some EdTech integration examples from an assessment that we have provided out to districts, and then we are able to take that data in. And when we study this data, we put it actually back in front of the persons that have taken the assessment, because that's good assessment practice. We want them to see where are we currently at, so that we can support that goal setting process with them. We start to do a needs assessment. We then start to identify ways in which we can start to establish those entry points, and then we build out from there. So what we're seeing here is in this process, that in this first question, right, we have less than half of the school being, pretty proficient or mastery. Okay.
Actually, more like a
yeah,
third of
Mike.
it. Yeah, it's just a third of the school is
Third of the school.
proficient
Yeah.
It's even lower.
Yeah. When we look at the model and being able to provide examples on how to even use. So Mike, you were talking earlier about, there's all of these tools. Well, the more tools we have, it's going to be harder for us to be at a proficient or mastery level on that second one, because too many tools reduces our proficiencies on being able to use all those tools. So that's sometimes where Mike and I would look at this data and say, well, how many tools are we using? Because that's going to impact this type of data. So this data can lead to a lot of things. It's not just always entry points, but as Mike demonstrated, how many different instances or how many different tools are we using? Because we've learned that from just a very few tools, we can have really high impact and really learn how to broaden the use of the tool. And that's something else that we really talk about, is how might we use these tools in different ways.
Yeah, and another good aspect of that is this idea of capacity building. How many times have we heard capacity building, capacity building, and it starts to feel like a unicorn after a while, because everybody mentions capacity building, yet it never gets behind just the conversation about capacity building. And the reality of this is, if you look at this data specifically, in order to build capacity, I would anticipate that somebody needs to be at a mastery level of the software to be able to teach other people how to do it well. So if you're looking, say this is and this could be for a district, say it's a district with 1,000 teachers, you have a capacity of 25 that could potentially teach the other 975. That's difficult. So we would want to keep track of this data, work with staff, or have the people who are doing this work with staff members, start to build some of that mastery level before they even floated the conversation of building capacity across your district. And when you're looking at 3 tools, that mastery to capacity conversation is a lot different than when your district supports 12 tools. When at 12, you can't really build mastery and capacity in a lot of things because there are too many things going on. So we always float as teachers. Many times we always float to that like hot new tool, not knowing that like the real key is to double down and in G Suite become masters of Jamboard, and in Microsoft 365 become masters of OneNote. There are so many awesome things that can happen with core tools provided by the district that oftentimes people jump too far and too fast outside just because they want to, but it doesn't improve learning.
Yeah. So Mike, you mentioned Jamboard. I dream about Jamboard every night.
Yes,
all
I know
the different ways I can use.
That's why I mentioned it.
No, I love it. No, I love it. Yeah, Jamboard is, for a long time, I thought Jamboard was just another whiteboard, but really, as you start to use more of it and you keep using, the other thing that we talk about, and I'm just going to put this out there. I really like using the question, how might I? Because that's a really empowering question. And I feed that question all the time into the technology sessions that I'm working with teachers and administrators, because when we ask that question, it really opens up opportunity. And that's really led even myself to really think about even the simple tool, like you said, Mike, Jamboard, into so many different ways. So it's always an appreciated conversation when we enter that. So when we want to look at a very high quality instructional technology framework, and this is something that Mike and I talk about in our other webinar, is we always like to lead with the why. Even though I have the what on top, I'm always leading with the why. And I do that a lot around lesson design, because teachers are, when I work with teachers, faculty, admin, we're always looking at, well, what tools can I use? Well, I like to start with the why, because when we ask our why questions, for instance, like why we do something, well, we're going to fuel technology tools with great instruction at every level of the organization to increase student achievement. The focus here then is the why really is on the great instruction, and we're going to fuel that with technology tools. So it's not the technology that's doing the teaching and learning, it's the great instruction that we set up, so that we then can figure out where and what are those purposeful tools that we could use. How we're going to do this? Well, when we work with districts with our assessments, in order to build out that instructional technology framework, we're going to leverage our assessment data to align to our instructional needs. So the assessments that we have are those tech integration, but we still want to match it with your instructional needs. We want to make sure that those things are in a line. So we're looking at appropriate technology tools to maximize the impact of your ongoing professional learning. So Mike, as you said, let's get really good with 3 tools. And what are those 3 tools that can be in my tool belt versus the 12 tools and 9 of them are going to sit in that van? We don't want to go there. And then what we do is, through our conversations of the why and the how, we get really clear then on what we're going to offer. And that comes down to offering really relevant professional learning opportunities to everyone in the education world. And why? It's because then we want to build capacity across the school district. So that even means when we offer relevant professional learning, it can be the learning that we do is going to be used for everybody throughout the district based on your levels and how we can support leveling you each up. So again, when we have this alignment and we're very clearly focused on this, what it really leads to is that high quality instructional framework that we now can build on and just keep building deeper with.
And when we do this, right, we want to cement those kind of long-term software initiatives, right? When we've established this hierarchy and we have a few things that we want to learn to use, then we want to make sure that we focus on a long-term integration and have checks to make sure that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. And then we want to make sure, as a part of that, for it to become part of our instructional design. We're looking at our curriculums and seeing where these ideas can be established. For example, you might not want to specifically reference a Nearpod or a Pear Deck for formative assessment, but if you are making formative assessment a core part of your curriculum, it's going to be difficult to live without one of those tools. So what we hear all the time is and I heard it whether I was walking through a hallway or working online on Zoom with multiple districts. We would say, okay, let's focus on these tools. Here's the hierarchy. We've established it. And once we're ready to move forward, the question becomes, well, they're just going to change in 2 years anyway. Once we get a new administrator or superintendent, they're just going to change direction and go this way anyway. And the reality is, if you have it embedded into your instructional design, and if you have integration plans that establish the importance of these pieces of software, then those should be able to withstand changes potentially in teachers, administration, or things like that, to where you can continue to focus on those goals.
So Mike and I have really been talking about how we set up and support our districts through these conversations, through these assessments. And we saw, from that data that it's very valuable to establish and identify and then establish our entry points. So Mike just talked about two integral parts to what we call our 6 pillars of effective instructional technology. So when he was just talking about the instructional design as well as that integration of technology. But the reason why we want to run our conversations and decisions on technology through this process, because it does 3 main things, and it creates high impact as well as a very clear picture, a path of where we want to go. So one, it's a very relevant entry plan. Again, when we use assessments and we have conversations around that baseline data, we can become really clear and start to align that with our instructional as well as our curriculum and overall goals for our district. Next, we always make this part of, we have districts part of this process. We have our schools, we have our administrators, we have our teachers, because having the right stakeholders as part of this process is only going to improve the end user experience. The end users are the folks that are going to be getting in that professional learning. And then from that professional learning, we're having you do the same thing with your students. It's about that end user experience. And then lastly, when we have a structure, when we have a framework, it will inform our return on investment. We want to know from all the energies, from the monies that we spent, from the time we've put into it, through our scheduling and all the things that come out of it, we need to know what has been that return on investment. So we're going to do continual monitoring from our baseline to our postline. Like Mike even said, from every professional learning to another professional learning, we're always doing an entrance ticket. We're doing monitoring throughout. We give them kind of a homework assignment to go try. So when you come back, we're going to see where you're at next. It's that continual progression of building up as well as loop closing. We want to make sure that you're finishing through with that piece, and then we're going to add on to that next piece. All right. Mike, you're good with this one. I'm going to let you take this one.
So in looking at the ed tech integration example that we're going to be talking about here in a minute. So we want to talk about how this kind of comes into practice, how we start taking these assessments, taking the software that we're using and start to put them together into course descriptions and titles that kind of bind us to really good professional learning. Not just, hey, here's a tool, here's how to use it, let me show you this thing. It winds up being purposeful. Every time that we do a professional learning, even this professional learning, at the end of it, we're hoping there's something you can take away and put into practice tomorrow. That is really kind of the purpose of what we're doing. And that integration example, going back to a couple of the questions from a real assessment at a high school. One of the questions was use technology-based assessment tools that provide teachers with real-time data on student performance and progress and give meaningful feedback to students they learn. I would contend you could not be a successful school this year in a remote learning environment without knowing those levels. And the reality is this specific high school that we worked with, their mastery of this was a 0.7%. That's probably one person in the entire building. Now, that caused Emery and I to ask a lot of questions. And I can tell you in this instance, we did come up with some answers. So what we did was we looked at this assessment and then we said, oh my gosh, we need to dig into the why. And what we did was we asked for the list of software from the district. And in this instance, the district had a hole. They hadn't provided this school something to actually do this work. They'd never had an effective diagnostic to do this work. So we knew that if you don't have the tool to be able to do this, then you can't know this. And if you don't have this, then you can't be successful really with the remote learning. So that district went out and immediately bought licenses to cover this. And we've been working to establish that the diagnostics in this school ever since. It's really cool the way that this can be used over time to not only work directly with teachers, but to uncover holes and gaps that are going to be in kind of the instructional programming and educational technology. The other question is differentiate the use of EdTech instruction for students based upon their learning style and current capacities, which includes scaffolding and higher level activities and extensions. This school was 2% in the mastery range. So that explains why in this school and many schools, so much of remote learning has been direct instruction followed by a worksheet, direct instruction followed by a worksheet, because that teaches to the middle. And in this instance, this school didn't have the capacity or the skills built to be able to do more than teach to the middle. So that was this information that we received and from this school was really eye-opening for us, and has outlined everything that we've done every day since being in that district. And it's great because we get the pretest and we work to improve the post-test.
Mhm.
And it's just like we work with our own kids. I've got 4 remote learners at home. If you gave my child all the answers, they didn't research them and get 100 on the test, I'd be pretty annoyed with them. It's the same thing with us in the job that we do.
Yeah. Yeah. And Mike, you really pointed out that when we've been using these assessments in the way that we approach working with our districts and schools around our assessments, they've been really not only impressed with our work, but I think that it's the way that we've built a relationship with them. Because as you're saying, we're honest. So the assessments really bring that honesty piece out, because it's the data in front of them. They see it. Oh yeah, we do have a hole. It's not like Mike or myself come in and work with a new client and say, oh, you got holes here. No, actually, the data comes from what we're getting back from your stakeholders that we're asking to be part of this assessment. So what's been really great is we've been able to build out, with even our new clients, and we're always, having new clients come in, new districts come in. They're really appreciative of this approach on how we take this, because they really appreciate that data. We have conversation around it. And then we, like you said, Mike, then we sit down, get right next to them, shoulder to shoulder, whether it's on site or it's virtual, and get down and figure out what are those next tools? How can you help us out here? And Mike, this is definitely your slide as well. I really like this one. So why don't you talk about how we match our tools to our tasks?
It's my slide because it looks like me on a Saturday
No, not even close.
That's
No,
all.
no,
But
I love
really,
this
it's one of
slide.
the things that the visuals that I like. Like, if we are matching tools to tasks, right? If we have a guy with a chainsaw that shows up to every outside event, right, gets called by the neighbor and shows up to this with just a chainsaw, and tries to help you in your cactus garden with a chainsaw, or help you in your vegetable garden, that tool is only meant to do one thing, and that's cut trees. It is important for us to really be able to match these tools to tasks. And what vendors often don't do is they give you their tool that's the answer to absolutely everything. So you almost have to determine, as a district, as a school, as a unit, to identify the tasks that you want to get better at, whether it's diagnostic assessment, and find the appropriate tool to do that and learn how to do it really well. And there's only so many new tools that one can take on at one time. Now, one of the things that we've established in many of the districts to improve communication and offer staff members an understanding of what they have is this: we want to build an understanding of district software. A lot of times when people go outside, they just don't understand what they have available. So in this, we're using the example of iReady and iExcel. These are two tools that offer diagnostics. One is a continuous diagnostic, which is iExcel, with a practice tool that can be used, and recommendations that dial into present levels. iReady is, you have a longer form diagnostic, and that can actually be used for specific learning. But these are the kind of things that we'll look at. We'll look at the assessment, and we'll look at that district software, and we'll try and make decisions and match based on those. So what we do, right, we take that assessment question in this case, which is use technology-based assessment tools that provide teachers with real-time data on student performance. And in this case, we match it with an iExcel, because that's exactly what it does. And what winds up happening is, when we start breaking down the tool compared to the tasks that we want to accomplish, we come away with something like the iExcel continuous diagnostic for math, for intervention and enrichment. And that professional learning session is a 90-minute session that offers the understanding of current academic levels and working with teachers on how to leverage the diagnostic. That may be a session 1. 3 weeks later, I might come back with a data dive. And if we're doing standards-based alignment, I'm doing that completely separately, because you know what? As much as the tools need to match the task, we can't use too many tasks in our professional learning. And when people, sometimes people look at me when I say that, and they look at me with they turn their heads, because really I try not to mix those two. If we're looking at diagnostics, I want the tool that does that. I will bring back IXL to do standards-based instruction if that's the best tool for that, but we're truly matching the tools to the different tasks on every level.
And Mike, that's so important from working with districts. And actually, you and I worked with the district in tandem around this IXL piece. And I know through our sessions that we strategically put in place, we designed for them, we had our sessions built. A lot of them wanted to go off and get into the data real quick and so forth. And they wanted to look at all this. And we're like, well, okay, that's a separate conversation, because we really want you to get good with this piece first, so that you have a full understanding. Because part of it was, when you look at that first slide, it's around a specific area, so that when we get to the second section, it's around another specific area. And that really gets a deeper understanding of the tool itself. So as Mike said, if a company comes in and they just do that dump and drop professional learning, we look at it as a deeper level, because we're making sure that what your goals are for your instruction, what those goals are for your professional learning, as well as your professional learning plan, matches that assessment and the types of learning tasks or professional learning topics that we create and then provide back to districts.
Yeah. And
anything else, Mike, on this before we roll this out?
We're talking about the same district. I think, that district had the 1 hour vendor session. Our professional learning was more like 6 hours, broken down and segmented into specific things, with time to practice, with teachers leading data dives, with coaching sessions within it, and 6 hours is just the time that we were together, or you and I were training the team. That doesn't even account for the coaching sessions and the follow-up and the capacity building that you'll end up doing over the coming weeks and months. It's really important but the only way that we can get to this point is by working, Emory had done the groundwork with that district to determine that this was a gap and this was an extremely high need, not only during COVID, but after, when we began to return.
Yep. Great. All right. So we all want to thank you for spending our time with us today. Mike and I really talked at depth, and you could see the passion that we have and how we're supporting districts with this integration of technology. So again, thank you for joining us today around this topic, and please continue to follow us on social media. You can connect with us after our sessions. We do have a couple sessions coming up, and through these webinars, we've really gotten some great feedback from all of our participants, and they keep saying, well, we want more. And we've got 2 of those coming up. We've got one on high quality student engagement for in-person and remote spaces, and then another one, because we're starting to look out in front as we start to prepare for next year, and that's crisis innovation and how we're leading our high schools in the post-pandemic era. And we have, we appreciate, for all of our clients that have been with us, we want to share out with you that, and those that are attended today, that you can register for these events. I'm going to put those in the chat box if you'd like to get in on this. We have our cost for each of the series, and then we also have a special discount code for attending today to get a portion of your series at a discount with us. So we have that series coming up. That's going to start on April 13th, 14th, the 20th, and the 21st. And that's with Carolyn Tinsley and Christina Lesh. Wonderful. Very deep thinking and very, they've got a lot of best practices. They're experts in the area. Their webinars have been top notch, and a lot of the webinar participants have asked for more. So they're putting this out as a special offer to everyone for that as well. Yep, Mike.
They are the instructional yin to our EdTech yang.
Oh, I like that.
They are our teammates in many of the districts that we work with, where we're thoughtfully implementing ed tech solutions from a really deep instructional level.
Yeah.
They are two of the people that have really kept us grounded in our ed tech work throughout the year, and making sure that we're doing the best we can to meet the learning needs of districts.
Yeah, I'll give you a quick example. I really took a deeper look at the social emotional learning piece, and I've started to rethink even how instructional technology can support some of that. And I'm starting to infuse that, as well as, I'm infusing that into the work I'm already doing with teachers and administrators now with instructional technology, because we see that that's very valuable to them. So, and then also, we've got our crisis intervention one that's also coming up in April. That's a Saturday series, back-to-back Saturdays from 9 to 12. So we hopefully see you there and join us for those sessions.
Emery's a part of that one if you want
to. Yeah, I'm a part of that one. And I'll be looking at some best practices with instructional technology in those sessions.
I also welcome anybody who has questions following up this session. There is a chat that is ongoing inside the LinkedIn event itself. We can certainly keep that chat going for as long as people have questions. We appreciate the engagement and want to be there to support you.
Mike, thanks for joining me this evening.
Yes, thanks for doing this. This is always a blast to do these quick sessions, and thank you to everybody for joining us. And we hope once again that you'll check out some of the work that we're doing. Follow us on social media and keep in touch.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.